Simon Parker is a scientist with a rationalist upbringing. In this podcast, he tells how his love of gardening led him to an interaction with a blackbird that transformed his opinion on nature's sentience.
My name's Simon and I live in Salisbury. I work in science and I've done that for quite a long time, but I've got a passion for nature, and I spent a long time fascinated by gardening, and also this idea that we can kind of like manage the world around us and where we live, and that we can interact with it in different ways than the sort of traditional ways of like just going out and mowing the lawn and having flower beds. And we can embrace that our role as part of nature in the landscape around our living space. And so I'm fascinated by ideas of growing a forest garden, a productive forest garden, growing food, but in ways that doesn't mean going and kind of like putting in so many hours down the allotment to grow some veg, like ways of like having an abundant garden that produces things that we can use and need and give us shelter, but also like an amazing habitat for wildlife that's right up close and where we are, rather than off at a distance, you know, somewhere over there in the countryside, but bringing that in close. That's been a passion for quite a while, but something I've stepped away from more recently. But I still maintain that a passion for nature and the landscape, but also the wildlife within it.
Do you want to tell your story?
Yeah.
So I've never heard this before.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for not asking me all the details in advance. It's nice to tell it without you having heard it. When I started growing a garden when my kids were younger, and with ideas about growing food, I kind of saw it as like an exercise in producing produce, and that really evolved as I saw like the complexity and the kind of beauty of it, and all the wildlife, all that, you know, from the smallest things. Like I used to do time-lapse videos of it growing, and like the apple trees growing, and like snails like eating the mulch on the ground, and I used to love that, and it really changed the way I thought about all the different levels that these creatures were operating within, you know, such a small space but overlapping. And through a series of events I ended up moving away from the garden, and the garden's no longer there in the form that it was, but I still live in the same town. I spend a lot of time outdoors walking, but I sort of try to create this garden, something similar maybe, but I feel like I've never really told the story about growing this garden either. A few really intense years where lots of really big things had happened, lots of big life events had happened, and it's been really overwhelming in a lot of ways. One of the things I love looking around charity shops. I love, you know, that's something my partner and I do a lot of, and, you know, looking for pottery and books. And I was on my own. I was in British Heart Foundation charity shop, and I found this book, and the title of the book was something like Behaving as if the God in Everything Mattered. And I was like, oh, and I thought, well, this is going to be a religious book. It's probably not. But I took a look, and it was this beautiful story of an American woman. She'd had a very difficult start to life. Her parents split up when they were quite young, and she was living with her mother, who was an alcoholic, and she was abandoned by her mother for months, maybe a year at a time, and had to fend for herself. Was like 12 years old or something, and really difficult beginning to life. But she found her way, and the book was about her sort of making peace with having really intuitive gifts and kind of like psychic kind of gifts. And, you know, I'm brought up in a really rationalist kind of upbringing, and those things I'm like, you know, I've always been kind of skeptical, but lots of my life experiences have led me to think, you know, that the fact that we can't explain something doesn't mean it's not there. And actually there's a lot of people I've met and I trust have kind of, you know, that's been part of their experience. And so I kind of read it at face value, and kind of about halfway through the book her story changes, and she's kind of moved to the city and she's grown up and she's met a partner and they buy a place and it's kind of like a small farm, like a small holding. And I was like, this is really beautiful. But what was really, really interesting was the way she chose to manage this garden and this farm and this kind of like crops there. Was she would use her intuition to listen to what nature was telling her in a very direct way. So she would listen to what she talked about, like the spirits of the different parts of the garden. So the different plants were telling her, and she would kind of, it was kind of a process for her, but she started to trust that, and she had amazing results. And I was like, oh wow, this is quite a story. And there's a little, my kind of inner skeptic was still, had a kind of seat at the table and was going, yeah, but it's, it's just a story, it's just a book, right? And she was talking about, and this was maybe in the 80s or something at this point, and she was talking about Findhorn community in Scotland, and some of the parallels where they used like intuition and kind of, they were open to sort of spiritual direction about how they maintain this community and how they grew things, and they had amazing results and all the rest of it. I can't remember whether it was a book about Findhorn or one of the people that had been about Findhorn, but it was about nature spirits. And I was kind of like, oh, this is really interesting. I can remember my mum, like, before she died, she used to be, you should go to Findhorn, it's amazing, like the story. And I was like, yeah, like, it's... Anyway, so I started to read about some of the books from people who'd been at Findhorn, and some of the people who'd lived in Edinburgh and had felt like they had a real connection, like a kind of spiritual connection to nature, to spirits. And I was reading a book, and I can't remember the book, but I was like, I'm going to read this in the garden, it's a lovely sunny day. It was talking about, this idea of nature spirits kind of like runs through our folk culture and our literary traditions, right? It's in like Tolkien and fairy tales and all kinds of things. And it was writing about how some people have really become very interested in the idea of fairies or trolls or whatever. And in different countries, they're like part of folk tradition. And it's like, oh yeah, I can understand that. And I definitely met people who are like really into the idea of that. And it said, some people just go out looking for them in nature. But then it said, the guy who was writing this, and he said, but in his experience, actually, this intelligence in nature, it doesn't make itself known to humans unless there's a reason to. And that's either because it wants to confirm its existence, or it's like just pure like celebration. As I read these lines, a bird out of sight landed on the crown of my head, and I was absolutely electrified. My body was like, what happened there? Like, how did this, how is it I'm reading this thing, I put down my skepticism, like long enough to read this book that's followed on from this other book, and it's literally saying about being a confirmation of like this intelligence in nature and this presence of like, and I was like, no, you've imagined it. Do you know what I mean? Because I'd not seen it come down. I thought, oh, maybe I just imagined the feeling of this thing, literally on the top of my head here. And then I looked, and the bird flew round and landed on the rail where I was sitting at the end of the garden on the decking, and I didn't get a really close look, but it was like a robin size, but like a juvenile robin, like a sort of browny, like speckly kind of colour, like maybe like a wren colour, but bigger than a wren. And I just stared at it, and it stared at me, and I was like, and I was just like, I've got no explanation for that, but I'm always going to remember that experience and that connection. And I thought, oh yeah, I haven't got all the answers, like, but there's, I just felt like, yeah, we're just one form of intelligence in nature, and maybe one day this will make sense and maybe not, but actually it shapes my, like, how I experience the natural world, and how I think about like creatures all the sizes that we share it with, and and that I don't need to go and like walk in the woods and look for the white deer, and which I love doing, and but at the same time I can just walk in the garden and just be open to that and know that we share that. I'm part of nature and the earth, and that's we're all sharing that intelligence that links us all together, and
As you were describing that, I found that really emotional, because the likelihood of you reading someone who so chimed with you and on such an extraordinary level is so slim. And then you're reading, as you said, about opening to nature, and it's saying nature comes when you need it, and then the bird came. That's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
What do you think it was? Was it your openness?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I suppose I don't feel like I've got the answers to. I think I still hold that in the kind of place of, I know that this is important for me, like, and I feel like an enormous sense of gratitude as well for that experience and that connection, and I don't know what it means. I was kind of like, is this, I've got to revisit, all my forest gardening kind of like stuff that, I feel like was unfinished, or, but actually it's kind of, I think what I really take away from it is like, as a sense of liberation as well. It's like, it's like our human intelligence, our sort of rational intelligence, like it's not what makes the world turn and all of these things happen. There's all of these things happening at all of these levels all of the time, and however we make sense of that, like it's not done by us. We live in a technological world, and I think we get so used to thinking that we're in control, and so it was a really humbling but also liberating sense of that's really beautiful. We're all here, like, together and connected in ways that we don't understand, but there's something there that and there are times in life when things just happen to you that you can't explain, and all you can do is kind of maybe take a step back and think, that's really changed my worldview, and I know that's going to inform, like, the decisions I make, but I don't quite know how yet.
I'm really interested in everything you say, and by the way, and I agree with everything, especially about the intellectual stuff and the not understanding. I agree with it so profoundly, and again because of my own experiences. I've not sort of like heard this thing before about this being like this openness where it comes in when you're open to it. Do you know anything else about that?
I don't know. I mean, I've got ideas like about maybe this stuff is happening all the time around us in lots of ways that we're just so busy kind of like running through thoughts in our head that we don't notice like 99% of what's happening around us. And I really catch myself thinking, I don't know what happened in the last 5 minutes, like I just walked from here to there or drove from here to there, and like, and then but when you do stop, you're just like, you can kind of tune into that as well, I think, and yeah, realise there's this, we're surrounded by this like vitality, this life force that's making everything happen, and like and I think the more we get out of the way of like trying to make sense of it and rationalise it, or control it, the more special that becomes, and it's really interesting from a gardening kind of point of view as well, because like gardening, in some senses it's this idea of like stewardship. You're looking after a space, but I think we've got these really traditional ideas about like, oh, if you let your grass grow long and you don't weed it, you're not doing your job as a gardener, like to where we are now, which is maybe like we're much more embrace the idea of like we can like garden in a way that accommodates all kinds of like wildlife. But in that original book, Behaving as if the God in Everything Mattered, like it's really interesting the process she describes, going through like sort of imposing her original ideas about how to do it, and then finding all the ways that can go wrong. And then when she starts to listen, and I don't feel like I have that gift to be able to listen in that way, but like her story is that actually there's all kinds of things going on that just a simple plan is too simple, because it's you're ultimately imposing your will on, like, from a limited perspective, and it has an impact, and I think that's the really humbling bit. So when you realise that actually you can have a negative impact, and there's like there's an emotional component to that, like, because and I think we tell ourselves I think we often don't like to think about it, because it's easier to think, oh well, I just need to do this because that's what I've got to do. It doesn't really matter what the impact is. But when you start to actually feel the reality of that, then all of a sudden it changes how you act.
Because it's a bit destabilising, isn't it, to go outside these sort of like conventions. You have to be brave in a small way, but that small bravery isn't necessarily easy, is it?
You
have to be a bit free.
Yes, and I think you have to trust yourself, your own experience as well, rather than take it on authority.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, and then there's the weird irony of like you trust yourself, but then at that point you realise you're open to connection, because then all of a sudden you realise you're connected to all of these other things that are all interacting together.
It's a really wonderful thing that you experienced, and that you it's a bit like a learning, isn't it? Yes, it's like you're forever changed by it. Like a simple thing that you'd struggle to really explain to someone without taking the time to like. But there was one other time actually when my kids were younger, and I was in Salisbury, and I wasn't far. I think we'd been swimming or something, or walking past the swimming pool into town along the river, and a small blackbird, it wasn't a blackbird, but about that size, landed on my shoulder, and I was like, what just happened? Like, and but it stayed there. It stayed on, and it was chattering, and we were walking along, and like the kids, and my wife was like looking at me and like, what is that, like, and it started to kind of get closer to my ear, and I was kind of a strange mixture of just real excitement, but also like it's actually going to like start pecking my ear, and maybe it went on for like 30 seconds a minute, and I was just like,
oh no, I'm freaking out now, and then maybe I moved my shoulder and it flew off, but I think, I was just smiling for like the rest of the day, because it just felt like such an amazing close-up encounter out of nowhere, like unexpectedly, and I think, I wonder what it was saying. What would it, if I could understand it, what would it have said to me, yeah.
Because this thing, like when you look into an animal's eyes or a bird's eyes, anything's eyes, it's no different to looking in a human's eyes, is it?
No.
Yeah. So an animal that wants to be in society with you really does. Don't you think?
Yeah. And to think, it's so different if it's like a domesticated animal, isn't it? But a wild animal to have that encounter, like, and that be their choice as well as yours, like
that's it, isn't it? Yeah,
really special.
I'm going to say thank you.
Oh, you're really welcome.
Thank you so much. It's been really amazing.
Oh, thanks for letting me tell my story.
No, I'm really, really so grateful. They're really wonderful stories. It's the mindset. Your mindset is so open.
Subscribe to Nature Talks with Humans for more true stories of people communicating with animals, birds and landscape. Follow me on Instagram at Estelle_writer44 and TikTok at Estelle Phillips. Bye!